Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming today to this year's global conference. We know that this is going to be particularly exciting, and we're excited here in Los Angeles because we are preparing to welcome the world to our city and showcase Southern California as the premier hub for creativity, business, innovation, and change. Today's event comes as LA is preparing to welcome the world in the coming years. Everybody knows we will host the Olympics in 2028. What people might not know is that in 2026, we have the World Cup. In 2027, we have the Super Bowl. And then in 2028, we have the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Millions of people will be here from more than 200 countries, speaking hundreds of languages. And this will be one of the largest gatherings, especially of world leaders in history. We'll be ready because at every turn, Los Angeles is innovating in exciting new and green ways, especially. This growth is real, and you can see it all around us. You might have noticed when you landed in LAX, of those of you who are from out of town, that LA is in the midst of a $30 billion capital improvement program, which will create a world-class experience and connect the airport to our LA Metro rail system, providing easy access to many sites and many communities. LAX continues to be one of the country's busiest airports with over 75 million passengers served last year. Our port has been ranked as the #1 container port in the Western Hemisphere for 24 straight years. And we're seeing record volumes of economic activity that's generated in the Port of LA and Long Beach, including where it's connecting 1 in 9 jobs in Southern California and nearly 3 million jobs nationwide. And that's because nearly 30% of all the goods imported and exported by sea in the US travels through our port complex. Goods from all over funnel through our city and our ports, and these global travel and trade centers puts LA in a unique opportunity to connect with other parts of the world while still remaining a hub for local community and culture. We're making strides on our public transportation system, and we've recently completed a regional connector system as riders travel around the entire region. We know that our city, however, with all that is going on and all that's great, and especially when it comes to global warming, that we will continue to strive for our goal of being 100% clean energy by 2035. But as we move forward with all that is happening wonderful in LA, we have our problems. And if you've been here for a while or you're from LA, you are certainly aware of our problem having 46,000 Angelenos who's sleeping outside in tents every night. This is where we can use innovation, entrepreneurship, and solutions that are developed here will absolutely impact the country. And so as you participate in this conference, whether or not you're here to explore options for more housing, support for businesses, protecting our environment, or improving the general livability of cities across the world, just know that Los Angeles is standing by as your partner to achieve these goals. All of you here today represent hope and solutions from around the world that are working under the same mission as we are here in LA. We're all motivated to make our society better because we know that the future is not guaranteed. I hope you enjoy your time here in LA and explore all that LA has to offer. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. So let's just get started if we can. And if I can start with you, Matt, something we perhaps don't recognize as much is simply the rate of change right now, which perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, is actually increasing. When I talk about the rate of change, there's the computing power, everything else that sort of goes into so much of what we discuss and will discuss here. Just give our audience a sense in terms of what we're talking about when we say that that's increasing and whether or not that is something you think is generally sort of appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. I think, generative AI is probably the single largest technology shift that's going to affect how we interact with data and information and each other. That's arrived probably since the very earliest internet and those very early web browsers. And organizations that invested in the very early internet went on to experience pretty tremendous growth over the past 30 years, including Amazon.com and many others. I think organizations that are investing in generative AI today are going to experience multiple Amazons of growth going forwards. And part of what gets, I think, so many people so excited about generative AI is that there's two really big shifts happening at the same time. Normally, you just get one, and one would be remarkable. But two happening concurrently is virtually unheard of, and is why it gets everyone so excited. The first is just a step function change in the type of problems you can solve with machine learning. Under the hood, AI is just machine learning. Machine learning is just a math problem. But the type of problems and the complexity of problems that we can now solve through machine learning is greater and more complex than ever. That would be exciting in and of itself and cause waves of transformation. The other thing that's happening at the same time is just a broadening of accessibility of that technology. It's easier today to use this technology, apply it. You don't need big data science teams or even large amounts of data to be successful. And that broadening of accessibility usually lags behind step function changes in capability by several decades. And those two things happening at the same time, I think, have fundamentally affected the rate of change going forwards for technology, products, process, enterprise growth, startup growth, public sector utility, all of these sorts of things. And it's very rare that you see the actual rate of change changing in front of you. And I think that's what generative AI is achieving.
And what are the implications of that?
Well, the implications, the panel should pitch in, of course. The implications are that I think that absolutely every single product that we use day in, day out, on every single device, for any single process at work or at home, is going to use some mechanism, some form of artificial intelligence to reinvent that product, to reinvent the process, to shorten the amount of time that it takes a human to be able to complete that process, to do more and more automatically, freeing us up to spend time on much more high-value tasks and much more high-value problems.
Clara, I'd love you to weigh in on that as well, and maybe perhaps give us some specifics in terms of what kind of products and things you're seeing right now, and obviously what may be coming in the not-too-distant future.
Sure. I mean, just to build on Matt's point, I think there is a rewiring that's required for every job, just like we saw with the internet in the 90s, right? Everyone had to reinvent how they spend their day and what they were doing versus offloading. And I think at a company level, there's a re-architecting of departments and how work gets done, what can be achieved in terms of driving growth and efficiency. And then I think at an institution level, an education system level, we also have to re-architect those, just given that they were all developed in an era that is now outdated with assumptions that may no longer hold true. In terms of what we see here today at Salesforce, Salesforce works with knowledge workers in sales departments, customer service, marketing, commerce, and many more through Slack, which is one of our acquisitions. And what we're seeing is really amazing. In sales, for example, what used to take hours of meeting prep, now account teams can go in and use Einstein AI to generate a summary of everything that's happening with that customer, open customer support issues, their marketing engagement, any type of past interest, store visits that the customer has had, website visits, and armed with that information, provide a much better, more personalized experience. Customer service, customer question comes in. In the past, service representatives would have to pour through pages and pages of product documentation and knowledge articles to try to match up the exact solution with what the customer was asking. AI can help automate that now in an instant and free up that service representative really to connect in deeper ways. Now, I'll give you an example that I've just found tremendous, has been our work with Gucci. Gucci has a global service center. They actually have multiple ones, one in Florence, Italy, one in New Jersey. And they started working with our AI product about 2 years ago. And the challenge was that they couldn't hire enough service personnel to keep up with the customer inquiries that were coming in. And they didn't want to keep their clients waiting. It's a premium brand. And so we used AI to augment the service representatives and allow them to answer much more quickly and resolve the customer issue quickly. But then the unexpected thing that happened was that wasn't the end of the interaction. We saw AI then able to further help these customer service representatives become sellers and become brand storytellers. These are things that they're not trained for. And we were able to capture dozens of years of Gucci heritage and history in a way that no human could possibly memorize all of this, even if you'd been working at Gucci from the very beginning. And now even new hires in the customer service department could respond proactively to any type of, the customer has a purse in their shopping cart that they haven't transacted. Now they could story tell and talk about that. And so I really think every job is going to change. And just like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix was able to learn new skills, learn martial arts, I think we're already seeing that happen across a number of knowledge work.
You really want to go to the Matrix when we're talking about AI here? Really? You know where he actually lived, right? He lived in a little tube.
Don't want to take it too far. Right? Yeah.
Where he generated, the men in them. I'm curious, the actual interaction between the customer representative and the customer, that was a live human being to human being interaction.
That's right.
So how was the customer representative being served this information? What's the actual interface like, or how's that work?
Yes, as Salesforce customers, those of you who use Salesforce, if you're a customer service rep or you're a salesperson, there's a console that you log into on your desktop or on your mobile device. Usually if you're in customer service, you're working in a desktop. And so you have the customer profile information. And then it's a co-pilot assistant that is observing what you're doing, looking at what the customer is emailing in or chatting in real time, suggesting reply recommendations to that service rep. And then it's up to that employee to determine, okay, I want to use the AI suggestion, or I want to tweak it, or I want to bypass it and do something different.
Aravind, I'd love to get your take on sort of what you've heard so far, and if you want to explain a bit to the audience as well in terms of Perplexity and your approach.
Yeah, so all this generative AI revolution can be simply understood as trying to mimic human intelligence. And the way they've done that is to train this system called large language models that is predicting the next word from the previous word. Now you can ask, like, what's really there relevant to human intelligence that's on the internet? But all the footprint of our digital activity is the output of some intelligent thought process that happened in our head, but registered in the form of like text that we put on the internet, like Wikipedia articles with a lot of actual work, research work that people put into like reading a bunch of web pages and then writing concise summaries, right? Like archive map research papers were like work that scientists actually did, where they put a lot of amount of thought into like how to solve a problem or how to explain a topic when they write the introduction. All that intelligence is being absorbed by these models, but terabytes of data, right? So they learn from so much and they become so broadly intelligent that not a single human being can do a wide variety of tasks like the coding. Similarly, like people, like actual software engineers among the top earning knowledge workers are really smart and they write concise code to solve hard problems. So that means what? Once these models are available in the form of APIs, you can program them almost through natural language. It's a discipline called prompt engineering. You can program them, you can instruct them to do a wide variety of tasks, and you get the 80-20 on almost anything that otherwise you would have had to hire machine learning experts and like collect data and like tune and deploy. All of that went away. All of that pain drudgery went away. And now you can just like program them using natural language and some Python APIs and deploy something to production really quickly and collect a lot of user data. And then now you try to improve them constantly with your flywheel. So that's what changed. And that's why like the speed of AI development just exploded. And that's why we're seeing like so many people being able to build chatbots and so many different verticals as well as horizontal applications. What Perplexity is doing is trying to do what I explained in Wikipedia. The human activity of doing research on a topic. Like, let's say before your meeting, your manager is like, hey, can you just prepare a report on that person? Can you just prepare a report on that company? Or like, can you do the market research of the top performing companies in the S&P 500? Like the latest revenue, like what is Salesforce like recently investing into? Or like, what are they talking about in the latest earnings calls? Like, or what are the investments of Sound Ventures? Or like, what is AWS doing the upcoming like quarter, like what are they going to invest more in Anthropic or things like that? Like you just have a lot of these questions that you would otherwise have to ask an expert. But imagine that human, an intern does work for you full time, and they just went and read all the web that's relevant to your question, and then took only the relevant parts and wrote an amazing summary that is the equivalent of a Wikipedia article. And you got all of this in a second instead of having to wait for like an hour or two. So that's what's happening. That's the tool that we built called Perplexity. It's an answer engine, a research assistant that any of us can use. It's not meant to like take over your Google's use every day. You can still use Google to like navigate the web, but when you're actually having deeper research workflows, you would come to a tool like ours where you can just converse and get answers and get all the citations all in one single place.
Ashton, I'd love to come to you as somebody who's been investing in emerging technologies for the last 20 years and just give us a sense as to how you view overall sort of these developments, the rate of change that we talked about, and more specifically, what you might be looking for as something you think is going to be a particularly robust product when it comes, for example, to the enterprise or the consumer.
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. This is the most exciting time that I've experienced as an investor. Although from our perspective, there's a really similar pattern that's emerging from what we saw in the transition from Web 1 to mobile web. So, but there is a distinct difference, which was pointed out at the very top of this panel. When moving into this mobile web experience, we had to wait for everybody to get a phone in their hands, and now we don't, because all of that compute exists. We're experiencing the same Moore's law that we experienced via CPU, but now we're experiencing it via GPU. So our compute capacity is going through the roof. But the landscape already exists. I mean, in the move to Web 2, we had, it was like Intel, what's inside. Now we have NVIDIA, what's inside of this shift. All of the cloud companies, you have the Amazons, you have Microsoft, you have Google, all of the cloud companies exist and have the infrastructure to handle the load. And then on top of that, when we were moving into Web 2, most people just think about the operating systems that we have today, iOS and Android. But as that shift was taking place, there was iOS, there was Android, there was BlackBerry. That's always going to be an operating system. All the executives are using that. That's not going anywhere. We had Nokia, we had Motorola. All of these operating systems exist. And then it became this oligopoly of Android and iOS of sorts. And then on top of that, we had the application layer. And the application layer that we saw emerge was really this application layer that was able to be automated because it was highly predictable and exactly the same every single time. You run the same service again and again and again, and algorithms can run and do that. And it was really largely a disintermediation of blue-collar labor. And what we're seeing now is the disintermediation of knowledge workers, because it's not predictable every time. It's different every time, and it's more creative output. It's variable output, and so the way we're seeing it is it's like the advent of the tractor. You think about the output of a hectare of land or an acre of land before the tractor, and the output of an acre of land after the tractor. And now we feed the world, and for the first time in human history, have doctors and lawyers and nutritionalists and architects and knowledge workers across the board had a tractor. And it's a tool that we can use to increase the quality of our output. And it's a tool that everybody can use. And so when we're talking about upskilling labor and having, a service worker that's working in front, interacting with customers, but that now has the entire knowledge of your brand at their fingertips and able to utilize it, it's this like emergence. I mean, it's like it's as if the age of Aquarius is upon us, and we're seeing it across the board. And today, we think that those foundational models that are out there, the OpenAIs and the Anthropics and the like, are Hugging Face. We think of those as that operating system layer, and that the applications that are going to get built on top of it and the data that is going to be necessary in order to do that is everything. So what we're looking for today are companies that are creating these persistent data loops whereby some action that they're creating, that they're allowing, a way that they're allowing customers to exchange with their platform is creating a persistent data loop that just drives data back into their system. And if you saw the earnings report of the big cloud companies, it's up 21%. Suddenly all this data we've been collecting for all these years, everyone's going, oh wait, this matters. Let's get it organized and start applying these models in order to increase our output. That moment is upon us now, and it's the most exciting time to be an early tech investor that I've ever experienced.
Just to build on top of that, I think one of the things that was a little counterintuitive to me that I've observed over the past 18 months is that it's actually the regulated industries that have been able to move so quickly, faster than the average, to adopt this technology. And so these are companies like healthcare, life sciences, financial services, 160-year-old insurance companies, manufacturing companies, which, to Ashton's point, have already done a lot of the work to collect a lot of their own data, which is privately held, which encodes all sorts of operations and knowledge. And then they've had what probably felt like regulatory headwinds on top of that they've had to comply with. But that's actually driven data quality and data governance and data pipelines, which have allowed them to be able to have a really high trust of that data. And as a result, the incremental lift to be successful with generative AI is actually very, very low. They've already done a lot of that hard work. And so as a result of that, those groups have been able to move very, very quickly. On top of that, they often have very, very large corpuses of private text data. So clinical trial reports, patient records, market research, old life insurance documents, manufacturing profiles, those sorts of things that these models have never seen. And as a result, it's just really, really low-hanging fruit to be able to go through those different information, connect dots, find things that are similar, dissimilar, and drive all sorts of new workloads. We were working with a 160-year-old insurance company. Old insurance companies don't often have the best reputation for operating in the vanguard of new technology. And they've got very, very large volumes of old, 90-year-old life insurance policies that nobody has ever read. And they're probably going to pay out over the next decade or so. But they use generative AI to look at the scans of those documents and understand their risk to their business in a way that would have been impossible any other way. We're seeing similar sort of use cases on all of these sorts of large amounts of text data. And the third reason that I've seen be really compelling for these companies that operate in these businesses, in these industries, is that they've often felt a little bit on the sidelines when it came to driving broad digital transformation inside their industry and inside their businesses. They've looked at the Spotifys of the world and the Netflixes of the world and Expedias of the world and the Airbnbs of the world that have been able to use the web and cloud computing to be able to completely reinvent whole industries. And some of that has happened, but it's just much, much earlier in these sort of regulated industries. And they're using generative AI and investing in generative AI, not just as a way to catch up, but as a way to potentially leapfrog ahead of these other industries in a way which I think is really interesting. So it was counterintuitive to me that it would have been that group that was able to move so quickly. Well, but based on what we're hearing, is totally true.
You look at like that. What you were talking about, the documentation thing. So we were looking at a company a couple of weeks ago, and it turns out that doctors, before they see a patient, they really go through about 30% of their historic chart by the time they see their patient. But there's this new documentation software that exists utilizing generative AI that can summarize the entire history of that patient's life cycle so the doctor can go into the session and have much, much more information. But it's even more than that, because if you look at like the quality of output of some of these LLMs that are happening, and you look at like ChatGPT-3 that passed the bar exam in the bottom 10% of everyone that had ever passed the bar exam, and ChatGPT-4 came along and passed the bar exam in the top 10% of everyone that had ever passed the bar exam. ChatGPT-5, we'll see. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, you go, wait, some of the people in this room can probably access the best patent attorney in the world. You can probably access the best criminal attorney in the world. You can probably access the best whatever attorney in the world, but most people can't. But now that this is going to become available and the hallucination rates are starting to go down, we're actually getting higher and higher, better quality outputs. You can see a world where instead of having to have a company where you have 10,000 of the best lawyers in the world around patents. You could have one of the best lawyers in the world around patents and 10,000 AI agents acting with that person and precipitously drop the cost of access to that service. And if you think about replicating that across every single one of those verticals, suddenly you're accessing a massive swath of customers. Now, it's going to change the way people work. And if you're not willing to work with AI, or you're someone or a union that is rejecting AI, you're probably going to be up against it in a while. But if you embrace it and realize the value that you can create and the value that your network can create with it, you're going to realize a real boon of output.
And I think that's why this concept of having a co-pilot or multiple co-pilots is so powerful, because just like any of you could hire the best attorney, I think probably many of you have assistants and you have teams of people. But what happens when everyone can have teams of people who are domain experts in different areas? And I think it becomes a management challenge. It becomes an HR opportunity, just like we're seeing in Gucci. And I love the point about data too, just because for many years, enterprises have been collecting data of all kinds, but 80% of it is unstructured at most companies. And that hasn't been easily able to be analyzed until the advent of LLMs. And so now being able to bring together all of our structured data from different databases and SaaS applications together with unstructured data. I mean, you just think about the conversations that companies have, that employees have in Slack, and just how much tacit knowledge is contained in that corpus of data. And now being able to mine that, being able to unify it, to cleanse it, to really unlock that organizational knowledge, even after people have moved on from their particular job or their role, to really further the company. So it's just, data is the new gold, and being able to do that from a customer data standpoint, but then also access these islands of trapped data. I think the average company has hundreds of different applications and multiple data warehouses and databases and data lakes. And now being able to unify and harmonize that in a way that makes sense for the AI is really the future.
Yeah.
And all of this is built off of everything we've talked about exists today. Like everybody in this room has access to this today.
Yeah.
And what's about to happen, and it is months away, if that, is the exact same architecture driving actions.
Yes.
Like real world proactive actions on your behalf. Because it's the same exact idea where you go, okay, here's a giant corpus of data. I want this output ultimately. I'm going to access that entire corpus of data and say, okay, extract the next predictable token. And those tokens, instead of representing words, are going to represent actions. And you're going to go, okay, I've seen people do this before. I've seen it thousands and thousands of times. What was the most precise, effective way to get the ultimate output this individual is asking for that has been done historically? And it'll start to predict those actions and then execute those actions on your behalf. We are at the precipice of that being launched into the world, which is a whole insane, exciting new frontier, and comes with a lot of complications that aren't going unnoticed, comes with a lot of difficulty and a lot of constraint and a lot of restraint that has to be held. I know people that have these things built today but are not deploying them publicly because we need to be conscious of the security constraints that are necessary.
Who are the bays here? Who are we talking about then when you say
extraordinary engineers that have already built these types of models?
Well, we've built that at Salesforce, right? We call it our co-pilot. And to your point, as if content generation and summarization weren't revolutionary enough, because we're still in the very early innings of that, and that on its own is going to disrupt every single industry, not just knowledge work, but physical work too. But while that's playing out, in parallel is this even bigger wave from agentic capabilities. And so the way we've put guardrails, and our customers have told us this is what they want, is they've spent years putting in workflows and permissions, right? Sharing permissions. Who has access to what data? Which of my employees, which of my departments have access to which business processes? And because they have those guardrails hard-coded and they can monitor it in Salesforce, we're seeing more customers allow their co-pilots to access a subset of these capabilities in a way that they can verify, because it's really about trust. And just like we saw with the internet, a completely new set of risks emerge, and a category of cybersecurity that had to be invented to keep up with this. It's a massive growing category. It's going to be that times 1,000 for AI, right? We need, trust is the newest industry. And we need to be able to have monitoring, to have guardrails, to have trust in order for any of these capabilities to roll out, both on the consumer side as well as on the enterprise side.
But when we're talking about this stuff, it's not. We already all have the junior varsity version of this available to us today through the shortcuts on your phone or a Zapier flow or whatever it might be. But when the AI can optimize that flow for you and invent that flow for you, our productivity and our output is going to.
Yeah, I think this is an idea that's been around for a while, but I think we're at or just over the precipice of this. I think at Amazon, what we've seen is that we're able to now have our own engineers. We have a lot of software engineers at Amazon, and they're able to use our AI systems to be able to add new features and capabilities to our applications. And so they can say, not, I need to load up this code and start writing code and do it all manually. They ask the AI, hey, I want to add this feature to this code base. And the AI understands what it is that they want to build. It has all the context that it needs from all of its code base, everything that the developer's working on, everything else that we have at Amazon. We've got a lot of code at Amazon. It understands all of that, and then it will make a strategy of how to add the features in the code that it is working with, what tests it needs to update, what documentation it needs to update. And as it's working, it'll find what information it needs, and it'll go off and collect it. It'll ask a human if it gets stuck, and it'll systematically work its way through all the codes and checks and balances. And at the end, what you get, and this is critical to the trust and safety piece, is an opportunity to review the strategy, but also review all the code. And so it just appears as a pull request at the end of the process, and a human developer that we have can go through and review it all, and they can decide which parts they keep if they want to make any modifications going forwards. Now, that is a very useful feedback signal to improve the system, number one. But number two, it really drives up utilization because the developers are still in control and they still have the last say, the final cut on what actually gets put back into our development systems.
I love that example. And I mean, just to share a different example from a sales context, where we are today, right, in full production across many companies, across industries and segments, is we have a bunch of salespeople in Salesforce asking the AI, Einstein, to generate an email that they can send to their prospect. Right? That's like where we are today. What I love about what you're saying, Ashton, and what we can do with Copilot is you're going from asking the AI in a reactive manner to fulfill a task that you prescribe for it to the Copilot agent for sales saying, you shouldn't even be emailing this prospect, right? If your goal is to hit your quota for this quarter, you should be identifying new leads. You should engage them in these other channels because, by the way, email doesn't work, and I'm just going to do it for you. And so it's really that next level of cognition and the next level of automation. And we're so close. I couldn't agree with you.
What does so close mean? I mean, I'm trying to understand timing here because, of course, you know, when we talk about from a public investor standpoint, what they kind of are focused on, it's still the Blackwell chip that's coming in the fall, perhaps, and the power computing and the data centers that need to go up. But the applications and the tools, while a lot of companies were talking about them in their conference calls as a possibility, let's call it last year and into the summer of last year, when are we going to start to see real evidence, again, from a public equity standpoint, of companies saying, hey, we've got this application, this tool to use it, and it's saved us this much money, or it's proved this efficient.
It's happening now. I think
it's happening. Agents are being used in more narrow use cases.
Yeah, I think it's happening. Most customers I speak to, you know, they're talking about incremental revenue or cost savings of about $1 billion a year, something like that. That's what most customers are looking for. And today, where the majority of those that cost saving or incremental revenue is occurring is in the adjacent or ancillary business tasks. It's not at the core of the business. But over time, we're going to see more and more of the AI that is being practiced and rehearsed and perfected in these ancillary areas move into the core of the business. And that's already happening in some places. So as an example, you know, Pfizer, we work with them to be able to help train models to be able to detect new potential oncology targets. That is at the very center of Pfizer's business, and that's happening today. And they think that will drive incredible business value and an incredible new opportunity for all of their customers.
Ashton, are you seeing business models now, though, as well for applications that many people may not be aware of, from engineers and the like, using tools that are?
There are definitely commercial private companies that are out there today. I mean, you have to consider this real big aha moment isn't that old. You go back to the Google attention paper that wasn't that long ago, and you really look at like OpenAI's sort of, okay, we're going to publicly push this code. It was what, a year and a half ago?
Yeah, it was the fall of 22. It was late.
Right.
22.
So that's the fall of 22. We're in 24, and you go, it's not that old. So most of the companies that went, oh wow, this works, how else can I utilize it, or what's the architecture that needs to be built around it, are just beginning to be built. And we're seeing a lot of companies that really were seed companies probably 6 months ago, 8 months ago, now looking to raise a Series A and actually starting to show consumer product fit, consumer market fit, product market fit, and really starting to stack customers. There's companies that are using this to manage cloud compute, right? That you manage your cloud spend. You might not be able to predictably know when you're going to have spiky cloud spend. The AI likely can, so there's a company that we're looking at that's doing some version of that today. There's these companies that are in the clinical space that we're looking at that are applications that are out there that are today. But it's coming. The difference between Web 2 and now is that we don't have to wait to get billions of handsets in everybody's pockets. They already exist. People already understand that they want this output, they want it faster, they want it more efficient, and they're going to use it. And so we expect the ramp on these companies to not be dissimilar to the ramp that we've seen with OpenAI, where they went from 0 to $1 billion in revenue in 1 year. And you go, that's insane. We've never seen anything like that before. We think that a lot of these products or applications are going to have similar viable upswing.
Aravind, I want to see if I can. I'm sorry,
just one last point, because I want to be very clear that generative AI is widely deployed in a variety of enterprises, just full stop. And we can make it viable when we ground the LLMs, that is, give them the context of trusted data, right? That's why it's so important, all the CRM data and all these islands of silo data, bringing that in. That works today from a content generation and a content summary standpoint. And we're seeing everything from reduced resolution times for customer service to increased customer satisfaction to Gucci, these service agents now driving sales and driving the top line for the company. So that's there today. Where we still have more to do, and there's early green shoots today, we still have more to do as an industry, is on the autonomous agents front. Right, so that is the next level. And the reason is because then you don't have a human in the loop at all times. And so we just have to build out the trust layer and the infrastructure and the monitoring to make that viable.
And determine where the human needs to be in the loop.
Aravind, I don't want to skip you if you have any thoughts here, particularly as it relates to tools that may be widely used within an enterprise, for example, and things of that nature.
Yeah, so I think first of all, like Ashton said, like ChatGPT went to $1 billion in revenue really quickly, and it's just a bunch of people paying $20 a month, or enterprises, buying like $100 a month or something like that with all the security, and that's already providing a lot of value today to all of us. And like I mean, Perplexity is a startup. Like the last announced revenue for us at the time of our recent funding round announcement was like 20 million annual recurring revenue. And like we only started monetizing like 8 months ago or 9 months ago, something like that. So the speed at which generative AI businesses are generating revenue is just unprecedented. The most important thing is it's possible to do this with really few employees. OpenAI has like maybe 1,000 to 2,000 people. Usually a company to generate like $1 billion in revenue, like it's around 5,000 to 10,000 people. Perplexity is just like 50 people. And like you can already generate so much revenue per employee. And that's the amazing thing about building products in this space, and like very different advantage that startups have compared to the incumbents. And the other thing that like in terms of like, have we really seen the adoption? Is it actually like truly changing the landscape in terms of productivity and like savings? I would say that like the point that Clara made in the beginning, like we still all need a lot more education and like how to make use of these tools in our day-to-day life. And pretty much every company can already do with like much smaller headcount, because these AI co-pilots or coding assistants or like marketing copywriters are all like just another intern or like employee that we all have for ourselves, and we're just paying them like $200 a year. So honestly, as these AIs get even better, to the extent that they can come and answer questions like what would happen to the world if the interest rates went down or something like that, we would be paying like even $1,000 a month. One of our investors, Stanley Druckenmiller, in the previous round, he's like a regular user of Perplexity, and like he just said, I would pay like even $2,000 a month for a service that just keeps answering answers as truthfully as possible. So I think like it's just a matter of rethinking where we put our investments. If companies start putting more investments and spending on AI tools and productivity for the existing headcount, and instead of like hiring more and more people, we'll be able to like see real value gain and for all these AI businesses, as well as like a lot of cost savings for the other businesses.
We've heard a lot about data, though. I'm just curious because there's also been stories saying that for the LLMs, they're already running out of data or data sets they can trust. And yet I've also heard here about lakes of data that exist that companies are able to use and access in ways they weren't able to before. Those may be two separate things, but can somebody address that?
Yeah, so
Yeah, go ahead.
I think so uh, there's like the generic intelligence all these models have, that they've acquired by basically training on all human intelligence footprint on the internet. Now, enterprises have a lot of data too that you can throw at, uh, but there's another research breakthrough that's likely to happen this year or early next year, which is like models being able to generate data of their own and training on that. If you guys remember, when AI really went mainstream was the AlphaGo match that Google DeepMind system beat the world's like Roger Federer of Go. And that was not just by training on all the Go matches, the records of all the Go matches that have been played before. That was the starting point. But after that, the AI learned to play against itself, generate data for itself, evaluate if it was doing something good or bad, and then train more on what's good and train less on what's bad, and like continually doing this. And then it got to superhuman level. And then they realized that if you keep doing this without, and take off all the human data, it would just beat itself 100 to 0. That was alpha 0. We haven't seen that advancement in the large language models or generative AI paradigm yet. But that's likely to happen where you could say, hey, like give me an answer. Instead of just immediately completing it by giving one token at a time, streaming one token at a time, like how you're using ChatGPT today, you could imagine a system that just waits, does a lot of research, like a lot of explanations for itself, goes and reads thousands of articles, again thinks for itself, and comes back to you like after maybe like 5-10 minutes, and then gives you something that would blow your mind away. Now imagine that demo actually works. That can only be achieved where you train a model itself to generate a lot of data for itself, think, and then go back, generate a lot of data for itself, think. Now that process needs to be part of the training loop, and that's not happened yet. But once this begins to work, that's when all the stuff that Ashton was saying, like all the agents, like models being able to think, plan a whole like workflow, execute it, test if it works, go back, refine it. That's going to work eventually. It doesn't work in the current paradigm yet, but it's going to work eventually. And when that happens, it'll be a massive explosion of like economic value.
So the buzzword you're going to hear a lot in the next coming year is synthetic data, and what was being described is the notion of synthetic data. But if we think about it, the way we come up with ideas, and you go, oh, I have an idea, and you share it with someone, and they pressure test it, and then they go, well, what about this idea? And you go, oh, and then you pressure test that, and you go, well, what about this idea? If you're pointing these two agents at one another and they're constantly pressure testing one another. They're stacking ideas. And as long as you ground that at some point to a ground truth, so you're not getting so off in the weeds or hallucinating to some extent, that should be able to build high quality synthetic data that then new models can be trained on. And if we actually even look at the coming architecture at the chip layer and what NVIDIA is launching with Blackwell, if you actually look at the architecture of what they're doing, what they've done is they've taken 2 GPU chips and put it on one plate, and then it grounds to a CPU. So in essence, the architecture of the chip is exactly that. And when we get really excited about this stuff and start nerding out on it, which I do all the time, it's because we're looking at what's coming with this Blackwell chip and with these clusters that they're going to launch, and that they're 30 times more performant from a training perspective of the A100s that we're used to today, and at 1/4 of the energy cost, and the best inference we've ever had. So when you think about that and you go, wow, I'm pretty amazed at what we have today. And you go, what is 30 times more of this? What's that look like? And what does that do for us? And the excitement isn't about revenue or returns. It's about the problems we can solve in the world. Like Karen Bass was up here. The first time I ever talked to Karen Bass was about foster care like 10 years ago. How do we solve for foster care? How do we solve for getting those kids placed in the right homes with families that can care for them long term? And how do we solve for those families to be able to afford to take care of those kids? Like we talk about the homeless problem. We talk about permitting in Los Angeles. Why can't we build places for people to live? Because the permitting process in Los Angeles takes so long. The bidding process is so convoluted that we pay 10 times the amount of money that we should be for housing for homeless people. And you raise taxes, and you go like, this is crazy. How do we create efficiencies in that? We use AI and generative AI in order to do that. We should be able to take any permit, put it into the office, and it should be approved or not approved in a moment by an AI. All these solutions can exist and will exist. And that's what makes all this stuff so exciting, not the revenue. The revenues will be great. But what makes it as exciting is we're going to solve medical problems that we've never been able to solve before. We're going to be able to solve for people who can't afford services to have services. We're going to be able to solve for foster care. We're going to be able to solve for the homeless crisis. We're going to be able to solve for so many things because of what this technology can provide us.
That's a lot of promises there. I mean, and it's making me very excited. But the last time I heard the word synthetic used was synthetic CDOs, and that didn't end well at all. It ended with a global financial crisis. So I'm just curious. When I hear that word synthetic, I mean, this could go terribly wrong too.
Yeah.
Well, that's why trust is the most important currency right now, especially when it comes to AI. And it's not just more data; it's quality data, it's trusted data. And for that reason, I actually think that these agentic capabilities and the forefront will actually start in the enterprise. Because every company is looking for their edge, their differentiation, and whether they're regulated or not, they have decades of this data that's trapped on premise in the cloud, and that data can be used as a ground truth. I mean, that's something we're already seeing. And then the second thing that's really important is going back to this idea of a feedback loop. What does success look like for a consumer question? Well, in Perplexity and OpenAI, you can thumbs up or thumbs down something that comes out. That's helpful feedback. In the enterprise, it tends to be more cut and dry, right? In sales, you can look objectively to see whether a sales agent helps you advance a sales opportunity to the next stage. You can see whether you increase your win rate. You can see whether the conversion rate, the deal cycle is shorter. And that data is actually what allows the enterprise AI to get better and better over time. And that's really something that every company, right? Because your data is not Salesforce's product or any of these enterprise companies. That's what creates sustained advantage, I think, for each individual company. And the exciting thing is, as Ashton was saying, is that it's no longer limited to the very largest Fortune 500 companies, but any company can access these capabilities.
So the reason I didn't explain the whole thing of synthetic data is because it seems like a buzzword, but just to give you like a very clear first principles way of answering it. Imagine there were 2 students and you asked the same question to 2 students. One of them just wrote down the answer based on what they've already learned. And another person went and thought for a while like a really good deep thinker, and then like came up with a brilliant answer that you wouldn't have just gotten from the textbooks. Now, if you were an AI and you're trying to mimic humans, you could either mimic the first student or you could mimic the second student. And if you only mimic the second student, you get a much smarter AI. Imagine you do that for literally every prompt that you've already seen so far. And imagine you can do that for prompts you're particularly weak at, where you're just forcing your model to think harder and harder. You're applying more compute. And the fact that these chips are getting 30x more efficient at inference means you can apply 30x more compute per second now. That means that you just, for whatever question that you could otherwise think like for a few seconds, you can apply the equivalent of 30x more compute now, think harder, and then whatever output you get, you train on that. But that output came from the model thinking for a longer time, not just mimicking humans on the internet. Now, the resultant GPT-5 or whatever model is going to be called, it'll be way smarter, more reliable, more capable of reasoning, able to do like Putnam competitions or something instead of just like grade school math, right? It's just going to be a much more capable model. And I'm not saying all this is going to work. People are trying to make it work. Like, there are rumors that people are trying to make it work.
Rumors? There are rumors? What does that
I mean,
mean?
like Q star or whatever it's called. But I think the main point I'm trying to make is if it works, it'll be a massive takeoff for like tasks
Well, it's
that
going
are
to
just.
work eventually, right? I mean,
Uh,
is there a chance it will not work?
I
And
mean,
why wouldn't it if it
so
did?
it's not just throwing more compute at the problem makes it guaranteed to work. I think there's still some algorithmic cleverness required. But if the scientists at the top labs figure it out, then we're going to see a massive unlock in like the kind of applications we can build with those type of models that today we cannot build.
Earlier, you seemed to indicate you expect, this is sort of the broader questions as we sort of get ready to wrap up here, of the workforce. And I got a sense that you think fewer people are going to be employed, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you believe that?
Yeah, so there's a better way of saying that, which is people can do more with less. That's how I like to say it. Like if like earlier you would hire like a specialist for every role. Now you would hire a reasonable generalist who can do many tasks at once and rely on the help of AIs. Like take the role of CEO. It's one of the most replaceable roles, honestly. Like I you know everyone's
Don't
like.
say that here. You're going to get a. There's
And
gonna be
CEO
I'm
is
YouTube.
the most replaceable role.
It's one of the most. I'm not saying it is the most, but it's one of the most replaceable roles because at the end of the day, all you're doing is consuming information, compressing it, and taking decisions, which at some point a GPT-5 or 6 should be able to do better than you, definitely. Because simply by applying more compute, that's it. Your brain is like almost. I'm brain dead by the time I go to sleep every night, but GPT-5 will not be. It can think 24/7. Like it can keep applying more and more compute to the problem. I'm happy to take, and if it can explain its thought process, like so that I don't have to just trust what it says. I can actually go through its explanations, judge for myself if that makes sense. And if it makes sense, like it's almost like having an extremely smart person working for you, right? And like we all like to hire people smarter than us. Like there's even a rule that like every next person you hire in a company should be smarter than like the previous people you've hired. So that's what it's going to look like when we all have AIs working for us. And that means like the generalists, the creative people, the people who can like make use of tools and like get more done in a shorter period of time, they're going to be the winners in the next generation. And companies who hire such people will be like a lot more productive as organizations do.
I have a slightly
Jobs are only
different
going to go
but-
away when people lose their purpose. When the car came along, all the horse carriage drivers ended up out of work, right? Or they learned how to drive cars. And as long as people have purpose, they're going to continue to drive. I had 7 years ago when I invested with my team in the first company that we found that was pursuing AGI. I had this moment, and I'll never forget it. I was in Toronto, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was like, nobody's going to have jobs. And I called the CEO, and he said very calmly, he was like, no, it's actually better than that. The AI is going to suggest the job that you should have that will give you more happiness, more purpose, and generate more income. And I went, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Because people aren't going to run out of things to do, and they're not going to run out of having a purpose. It's just whether or not they're going to use this tool to do it.
I think, yeah.
And that's where we're heading.
I think the only way, the way that our jobs are going to change, we're going to get more efficient, and the only way that that ends up with fewer jobs is if you believe that there is a finite amount of work. And at least in my experience, there is an infinite amount of things that we need to get done in any organization, in any society. And what we're going to be able to do is just be able to tackle a much larger percentage of the most important work that's available to us. There's a lot of counterintuitism that follows a step function change in the rate of change itself. And one of those counterintuitive things, I think, is that as our jobs become more efficient, as organizations, we tend to invest in places where we have very high levels of efficiency because it gives us better return on investment. And as a result, you're probably going to end up with a software development team that is far more efficient. They get more work done. You're going to hire more of that type of person. It's going to be a much higher return on investment. And so counterintuitively, we're going to end up with more software engineers, not fewer software engineers. What the role of a software engineer is going to be very, very different. But we're going to end up with a far larger number of them in aggregate. And the businesses that support and grow as a result of that software engineering, as an example, are going to be much larger. It's similar to how we approach automation inside our fulfillment network at Amazon. We add lots and lots of robots to that system. Creates a much safer environment for the humans. We have about 750,000 robots that automate a lot of our delivery and fulfillment across the Amazon fulfillment network. And as a result, we ended up growing the business and hiring more people than ever. We have 1.5 million people that work at Amazon today as a result of the investment that we made in robotics. So the growth and the employment will be disproportionate to the efficiency that you're able to extract.
I think I have a slightly different view. I think it's both true that individuals and companies will end up doing more than they did before. For example, if you work in sales, we spend a lot of time doing lead scoring. Why? Because you have limited sales capacity and you can only call the leads with the highest score. If AI agents can help us scale that out, maybe we could call everybody who's potentially interested and have a much more engaging conversation. So I agree that there's going to be work will fill up the capacity that we have. We'll want to invest there. And I also think at the same time, there will be carriage drivers that are displaced. And it's incumbent upon business leaders, public sector leaders to do something about that. And something I'm really proud of is at Salesforce, we've launched a free online training course for anyone who wants to learn about AI. And it's very accessible. It's called Trailhead. And we've had over 1 million badges, AI certifications and badges earned since we launched this last summer. I know you guys have something similar, but that is something that we also need to talk about in parallel.
Do you use AI to teach the people to upskill them into the jobs where they can use AI?
That's coming.
Very
meta.
In the 3 minutes we have left, since this has been such a positive discussion, I'd love to end at a darker place. So maybe I can just get from each of you, and we can start, Ashton, with, I guess, when you think we'll reach AGI or artificial general intelligence. Maybe you don't care about that.
I wouldn't want to guess.
What your biggest fears are about this advancing technology. If we could just all share that, so it makes me feel a little better to end darkly.
I don't think I don't wait for AGI to have a fear.
You don't have any fears?
No. What I'm saying is I wouldn't wait for AGI to have a fear. I think it's justified to have a fear today, where you go, okay, we're now giving everyone the level of intelligence of the smartest people in the world, and sometimes the smartest people in the world run the secondary and tertiary calculation to say, well, that's not a good idea to do that because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes people who are having issues in their life or having some moment maybe wouldn't have the same capacity to think that through. And I think that needs to be highly, highly considered. And I think we're getting very, very close to having models that are open source, that are performant enough to cause larger damage than what we would want. And I think that we need to be considerate of that and the way that we're deploying these things, because I don't think we should let everyone in the world be able to come up with a high quality biological weapon. I think that that's like a dangerous thing to have happen. So we really need to be considerate around as these things keep advancing, who's building them, how we're deploying them. I also think that we're in an international space race of sorts. And I think it's very, very important that the United States maintains its lead in this particular arena. And I think that every time we open up all the weights and balances of all these models, we're basically giving information away. Maybe that's okay because most of it gets stolen anyway. But like, let's still try to protect what we can in our initiative to have a free and prosperous world.
We can go down the list, the line here quickly.
Sure. So I'm an optimist, but I think that just as the mayor said, the future isn't guaranteed. And it's really up to how we lead and the decisions that we choose to make as business leaders, as lawmakers, as members of government, and as individuals. And I mean, the risks are the 4 Ds, right? It's disinformation, especially with this upcoming election cycle, and non-state and foreign state actors who would like to see more divisiveness in our society. It's discrimination, biased, inherent, data security, data privacy, and it's displacement. And us working together really across public and private sectors to address each of those.
Aravind?
Yeah, if you define AGI by 80-20, there's 80% of all the knowledge worker professions and 80% of each task being done. I think we are pretty close to doing that by end of this year or next year.
End of this year or next year?
80-20.
Understood.
That doesn't mean that it'll displace all of us, but like
Right.
if that 80-20 starts skewing more to 90-10 or like 95-5, that's when things begin to look more weirder. And I don't have precise timelines for that because it's more about systems getting a lot more reliable. I disagree with Ashton strongly on the open source. I think also like a lot of OpenAI investors don't want that. So there's like a good correlation between that. But for people who want to build capital efficient businesses, there's no way to like make progress in their business without actually benefiting from models like Llama 3. And I think it's great for the world that we have more open source.
I'm very pro open source. I think we just need to be considerate of what those models are.
I think we should have an open source GPT-5.
Finally, Matt, we started with you talking about the rate of change only increasing. It seems like something to keep in mind here as you wrap us up.
Yeah, for sure. I think, technology capability tends to follow an S-curve over time. And you never know where you're at on the S-curve until you're at the point looking backwards. And I think most people would agree we're not at the top right-hand corner of that S-curve where what we've got today is going to be what we're going to have to live with only incremental improvements. Seems very unlikely at this point. I think most people would probably say we're at the middle of the probably high gradient part of that S-curve. New models, new techniques, new approaches. I'm sure as we've been sat here today, there's been a new model released just as we've been here that's worthy of our attention. But for my money, I actually don't think we've hit the inflection point, that hockey stick inflection point of this technology. And a lot of what we've been talking about, agentic systems, the sort of reinforcement learning systems, synthetic data, all of these pieces are going to start stacking up really quickly. And over the next 12, 18 months, I think we're going to start to see the beginnings of that hockey stick inflection point. And it'll be 24, 36 months when we're actually at that middle point on that high gradient piece. And so I don't have a crystal ball. We could meet up in 24 months and you would tell me that I was wrong today, and I wouldn't at all be surprised. Maybe it'll happen much quicker. But I don't think we've yet hit the inflection point of this technology.
All right. It says please wrap there, so we will. Thank you all for a great conversation.
Thank you.